Sravani here from Peninsula, Canada, joining me today. I invited you today here to have a quick chat with me because obviously I think we've got something that we should chat about. Obviously, welcome. First of all, so you got yourself a cup of coffee? There you go. You do.
Cheers.
Cheers. What kind of coffee are you drinking today?
So this is interesting. It's called filter coffee. So it's kind of like an espresso, but a little bit different. It's mostly with a lot of milk and a lot of sugar because I like things sweet. I hate the taste of coffee, but at the end of the day, you need coffee to survive, and I can't go a day without it. So make it as sweet as I can. So there's a ton of sugar in here.
Right. So you kind of adapted coffee to your liking, right?
Yeah.
So you like the flavor, but as long as it's associated with the sugar and the cream.
Exactly.
Yeah, I used to be that way myself. Yeah. I've gone away from the sugar and the cream because I went on a diet years ago, and then I started to have to drink coffee black. So now I won't drink it with sugar, but I drink it with cream sometimes. But even then, I still find it like just too fatty. After a while, like I can have once in a while, I'll have it, or if the coffee I find is too bitter, I'll put some cream in to kind of cut the bitterness. But typically, I just like black coffee. So I'm drinking, a 3-shot Americano here. So anyway, so today I invited you because we're in different industries, but we do very similar things, right? So we do outsourced IT. So companies that don't know how or don't want to focus their resources or can't keep up with keeping those expertise in house, or they don't get to see enough exposure in house. Single person running their IT, they typically outsource to us, or they'll outsource a piece of their IT. You guys do a similar thing, but you do it for HR, right? Yeah. So that's kind of why I brought you on today. So tell me a little bit about how that kind of works and what you guys kind of do on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for a company called Peninsula Canada. It's an outsourcing HR and health and safety company. I always like to phrase it as, the most boring part, I guess, would be to figure out how to do your HR documentation, policies. What can you do? What can you not do? Like, no one wants to sit down and have to spend tons of time trying to do that, which is where we would take that on. We would actually write the documentation, let employers know what their rights are, how to make sure that they are expressing those rights for their employees, and pretty much take on your whole HR department. Kind of like you said, outsourcing it so that we're the ones that are behind the curtain doing all of the paperwork, and we're leaving all of the implementation to the business to implement it as they see fit. So Peninsula is a global company. It's been around for over 40 years in different countries, but Canada is the newest branch. It's been open for about 6 years now, and I've been with the company for about 5 years. So I've seen so many different situations, so many different experiences, so many different HR problems that could go wrong. So I guess, I'm here to talk about, along with yourself, like how we can help small businesses do the things that they want to do, which is run a successful business with the least amount of problems.
Right. So, and that's kind of why I invited you today, because I think that insight of, you might have somebody in a company that deals with HR, but they only see what problems they deal with, right? What they're exposed to, and kind of like us in the IT, it's a very similar situation, right? Where we're getting to see a plethora of different companies, helping them upsize, helping them downsize, all those different things. So you might not have a single individual whose expertise kind of fit that breadth of knowledge, right? So that's kind of why I asked you to come join me today, because we want to provide some insight on this topic, and I just think you just have that kind of wide view that a lot of companies just don't get, and maybe it's from their existing HR. Maybe they don't even have HR, right? Maybe they're just hoping on the best for whatever's happening, and they just kind of roam into the dark and just hope nothing happens, right? So we want to kind of give people this uptake that, hey, we should be looking at this and being proactive as we possibly can. So the topic we want to discuss today is, are we able to electronically monitor employees for performance issues or other issues? This is a question that we get all the time from a technical point of view, in that people ask us, continuously, like, can we monitor our staff? And what we say is, you can, but do you want to? And what does that look like? So there's definitely different ways of doing this. There's more than one way of doing it, but are you allowed to from an HR point of view? Do you have that built into your policies? So these are questions that we get all the time, and it always reflects back to HR. And a lot of companies are just unaware of what that looks like. So could you kind of fill us in? What does that look like from an HR standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's similar to the way that you asked the question. If someone says to me, are we allowed to monitor our employees? The first question I would ask is why, what would be the purpose to monitor? I think that's very key, because in HR, in order to avoid that human rights aspect, in order to avoid that privacy law, you would always want to back up the reason as to why you're doing something. So if you do want to monitor employees, yes, absolutely, you could do so, as long as you have a valid reason as to why. For example, if it is a retail store, for example, and you're looking at inputting cameras in the retail store, especially at the cashier, the reason that you're going to be doing it is not only for the security purposes, but to ensure that your cash flow is being audited correctly and you have the money coming in and coming out correctly. As long as you're able to validate that in your policies, as long as your employees are able to understand that there is a camera, there is a policy associated, they learn that there is a policy and they sign off on the policy, absolutely, you can monitor your employees. But it's very important that the employees are aware of what is being monitored and why they are being monitored, what is being used to monitor prior to the actual implementation of the technology.
So under what circumstances should you have these policies in place typically?
I would say for every situation, always good to be prepared, because in terms of policies, maybe for today you don't have a certain technology, but maybe tomorrow they come to you and they ask for a technology. How often do you want to be implementing the policies? How often do you want to revise your policies? So it's good, like if you're thinking about monitoring your employees, before you even get the technology, make sure you have a policy on it. So that way your employees are aware that this technology is coming and they are going to be monitored. It's similar to how you would give an employee a cell phone. Right? You would give the employee a cell phone, but you would let them know, hey, this is company's property. If you damage it, if something happens, then you would be responsible for it. So similarly, you're giving them a cell phone. Yes, we are going to be monitoring, how many calls you make, for example, or how often you're using it, your data usage. It's always good to have that policy in place so it avoids that confusion. It avoids the employee saying, I didn't know. And that's the worst thing that could happen to a business, with an employee that's saying, I didn't know that you were monitoring me, and that's against my privacy.
Right. Yeah, and it's a common thing that we see all the time. Companies will make decisions, right? They'll be like, oh, instead of buying them all new computers or whatever, we'll be like, oh, they're working from home. We might as well just have them bring their own device. So the BYOD. And we're like, oh, have you thought that through? Because does your policy say that you have the rights to go in and wipe somebody's cell phone because they might have all of your company email on it, or wipe their home computer because they might have data on it that belongs to your company? And most of the time, no, they don't. They just don't have that stuff, right? So it becomes an issue that is really difficult to deal with from the technology point of view, because the company hasn't thought of the HR implications of it. So once that employee is sacked or decides to just leave and go to the competition, they've taken the cell phone number, which belongs to them, which they've now distributed to all your clients. And then it's kind of gone over to now they have all of your email and all of your correspondence, maybe all of your quotes, maybe your customer list, blah, blah, blah. And we have no ability or right to wipe that device, right? So because now you could be wiping their personal data, and then you'd be liable for that, right? So as an IT company, our hands are tied because the policy part of it hasn't been thought of, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like, I think it's always good to uh, understand what is a purpose of implementing the technology first, because if you know the reason why you're doing it, it will make you think about all of the different things that could come up. And that's the benefit of building these policies, because let's say, for example, you are trying to monitor your employees. And the example that I used previously is that you're trying to do it so that the employees maybe are, if they are stealing cash from you, maybe you have that on camera. But if you don't have a policy saying that the employee is being watched and the employee doesn't agree to being watched through the camera, even if you find the employee on camera stealing and you decide to terminate the employee based on that, if the employee decides to go to court for wrongful termination, they could possibly win, because that video surveillance, if they haven't signed off on it, on that policy, could not be even valid in court. And those are situations that we have seen. It was in the news, and we've seen, we continuously see those type of situations happen again. So, it's always good to make sure that you're thinking about the why you're doing it and how you'd want to do it, to be able to, understand, okay, moving forward, are we able to do this or not?
Exactly. Yeah. And then obviously these things kind of change by province, right? So if you're all of a sudden hiring somebody to work remotely from Alberta and you're in Ontario, or if you're in BC and you're hiring somebody in Ontario or Quebec, you don't just have employment laws to consider, you also have privacy laws to consider. Am I right?
Correct, correct. Yeah. So all the laws are different. I think right now it is only Ontario that is mandating that there is a policy. It's actually in the legislation that there should be a policy when you're electronically monitoring your employees. The other provinces haven't had that policy. Isn't requiring that policy, but just because it's not a requirement doesn't mean that the employee still can't go to court. And it just because it's not a requirement right now doesn't mean that it won't be in the future. Because usually in Canada, when one province does something, it tends to be rolled out to the other provinces overall as well. So
Yeah, and we know, we see that here in BC. So in BC, it's not an HR thing, but it's a privacy issue, in that if you're recording in the workplace, you can't record audio.
yeah,
You have to put up signs to let people know that there's recording happening, and then you have to be able to provide the employees all of the video content that you have of them upon request. So that, for us, that's like makes a big difference if a company's coming to us and saying, "Oh, well, we want a DVR, a digital video recorder, recording our staff." Now, again, sometimes it's not just so people aren't stealing, but it's also sometimes it's a requirement of contracts they have, where they might have third party hardware, software, XYZ, or access to third party systems, and they're required to videotape who comes and goes and who's accessing those systems and so on and so forth. So sometimes it's not the employer themselves, but they're being mandated to do this by contractual obligations, right? So they have to be able to provide an employee all the video footage they have of them, right? So if you've got a traditional DVR that you picked up at Costco that doesn't have facial recognition, good luck going back. Maybe you got 3 months of video footage. You got to go through, and because you can't just provide them full access to the DVR, right?
Yeah.
So you got to go back, and for privacy issues, you can't give them access to everybody else's data, right?
Yeah.
So you got to go through, and that could be a week's work. If an employee were to request it. Now, if an employee is, disgruntled or whatever, or is just trying to hold you over a barrel just to teach you a lesson, they could just request that, and now you're in violation of the Privacy Act. So
yeah.
it's a difficult thing. So selection of the technology makes a big difference in what you're allowed to do from the privacy point of view. So we need, as IT people, we need direction from HR and saying, this is what you're allowed to do. This is what we're going to require if this ever went to court, or if this employee were to ever file a grievance. this is what we need to be able to provide. So I need to be able to select technology that's going to meet those requirements. So we're always stuck between a rock and a hard place and saying, okay, I can give you, there's 50,000 different solutions out there. What do you want?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you'll pick a DVR, but you're not allowed to turn off the audio. It's not 100% disabled. It will still record the audio, just depending on the levels of DVRs you select. So there's 1,000 things that we have to consider that employers just don't look into.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, right? Like for everything that you implement into the business, you want to think about what could go wrong, what could be the consequences. And it could be an innocent thing. Like it doesn't mean that you're trying to do any harm. As a business owner, you want to do what you think is the best for the business. And but by implementing it, you also want to think about what could go wrong and what am I going to do to try and solve that problem. And I think that's where IT would come in. Like once you have all of the information, once you know what you want to do with this surveillance, why you're doing it, for what purpose, and what could be the consequences, then with all of this information, then you could go to, let's say, you guys to figure out what would be the best technology to get the job done, but to avoid any potential serious consequences from it as well.
Yeah, and simple things that we try to, and we're not able to give HR consulting, right? Because we're not certified and we don't have the ability to do that. So, we'll say simple things like you're deactivating a user, how much of their history do you need to keep, right? So you guys, like, we're always looking to HR to say how much, and they're like, no, just disable the account and delete it. And we're like, they've been working for you for 5 years. You might want to keep it around for 90 days or blah, blah, blah. And some companies that have HR policies, they'll be like, no, we want it disabled, remove the license, but retain the data for X amount of days, and then archive it and so on and so forth. So just data management instructions and like you said, policy, companies, they don't sit down and look through that stuff because they haven't been directed, right? So they don't know what their obligations are. So we, from coming from the IT guy, they're like, you just want us to, keep the license on for a little longer. No, it has nothing to do with it. We just want you to be protected, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think in any circumstance, an employee has up to 2 years to come back and make a claim against the business, and that could be about various different type of reasons. But privacy could be one of the reasons, or maybe they're claiming harassment or bullying or something, and they're saying that it was done on video or through the technology or in whatever matter. So by having these files for at least a minimum of 2 years could be beneficial. I mean, that's just a recommendation. It's not like it's a law, but at the end of the day, you want to feel protected.
At least have that conversation to say, how valid would this data be if blah, blah, blah. And, what type of work do they do, and walking a customer through that, right? That's where we lack the ability to kind of get into the nuances of it. It's like, how valid would somebody's email be after 2 years? Well, pretty valid, it turns out, if they're 90% of their communication happened that way. But maybe not so much valid if, on their Word documents kind of thing, right? So, these are the types of things that I think clients and partners need that direction, right? So I think this has been hugely valuable. I've learned so much. But do you think there's anything that we talked about today or anything that we didn't talk about today that you think companies should think about when it comes to HR and monitoring?
Yeah, I think we kind of covered it all, but at the end of the day, just make sure you have a clear strategy on what you want to accomplish, why you want to accomplish that, what kind of what are you going to do with the results of the monitoring. As long as you have a clear picture on what you want to do and you have an understanding of what could go wrong, that's the best way to pick the right technology for that purpose. And you definitely want to build policies around it. And that's the first thing. Before you even start monitoring your employees, you need to get their okay, you need to get their signatures so that you're not hindering on their privacy, right? But it is a difficult task. There's a lot of things to think through, not only on, what type of technology to pick, but can we do this? Can we do this the right way? Can we avoid any risk, any problems, any claims? And it is a lot to think about, and it's a lot to to spend time on to create those policies. And I guess that's why we exist. You're there to help them guide through the technology, and we're here to help them guide through all of the different type of legislations according to the province, according to their business needs, according to their industry. You need to be able to show the reason for monitoring, and it needs to be valid. So that's where we would be helpful. And we do provide complimentary consultations for businesses where we can go in and have these type of discussions to see whether it would be something that they could do, and help them write the policies as well as part of our services. But it is a big job, and that's why usually a lot of businesses outsource that job over to us.
Yeah, and I think, kind of like IT, right? You don't want, you want to do a dry run on a disaster, right? Before the disaster happens, because you want to know, who do you call? What happens if this happens? What happens if, we have a disaster, it's down? Well, we're going to email everybody. Well, but what happens if your email's down, right? So you want to do a dry run on what that is. So very similar with HR. If we're going to say, well, that person doesn't get, overtime because they're considered a manager. Well, have you predetermined that, right? So those are things you want to predetermine that they qualify and they've agreed to it before you just assume that happens, right? So a lot of this pre-planning to protect the business from an HR point of view, because as we know, employees have more rights than business owners do at this point. And so you want to make sure that those policies are reinforced and ready to go before you go ahead and take action on that. So obviously this has been a lot to kind of swallow, but if we could kind of summarize things into, a quick list of action plan that you think companies, like if they're worried about this, if they're concerned, and like we spark some kind of ideas in people's heads or concerns, and they're like, well, yeah, maybe we should dig a little deeper into this and make sure that we're protected. What do you think a quick action plan would be?
Yeah, so I think firstly, just have a goal on what you want to accomplish and why you want to accomplish that. Second one is develop your employment contracts and your policies, and whether that's with an HR expert, kind of like us, or with an employment lawyer, very important. That is what is going to protect your business. Have your employees go through the documentation, have them sign off on all of the policies. If they have questions, there might be valid questions, there might be invalid questions. Like there might be some situations where employees don't want to sign off on this documentation. So kind of just understand where the employee's coming from, and then, come to a reason on how to get those to be signed off. The fourth would be implement the systems. Make sure your employees understand that they are being implemented. Hold your employees accountable. If in case they do break some of these policies, hold them accountable, whether that's through disciplinary processes or even more. And then finally, record keeping. Make sure you keep a record of everything. Like we said, an employee can come back and request for some of this information, or you would probably need this information if they try to blame the company for something. So that, I think, is the main part. And I guess those would be the list of action points. Just making sure you have a goal, you have your contracts, you have your employees sign off on them, implement the systems, make sure you hold your employees accountable, and finally, just record keeping.
Yeah, and I would like to kind of just mention here as well, when we see this, it's not always a negative thing, right? Mm-hmm. People immediately assume when we go into like employee monitoring, it's a negative Big Brother type of scenario. It's not always that case, and I know a lot of companies misuse it, but most companies don't. I would say most companies are. It's about, like you said, accountability. It's about employees understanding what's expected of them, whether they can or cannot do the job. A lot of the times we've seen it in that employers come to the realization that, maybe I'm not compensating this person enough with the amount of requirements that I have for them, right? I got all these things that I would expect them to do. And, wow, we should be definitely paying this guy more. Or gal. So it's definitely something that we definitely see it more as a net positive a lot of the times, because it brings clarity to both the ownership and the employees. It allows that transparency, and it doesn't allow anybody to hide behind their finger and say, oh well, I deserve this much, but hey, we're not producing, or I need you to produce, an enormous amount, and there's not enough time in the day. It brings everybody into order. So.
Yeah, correct. And I think that's the main takeaway from this, whether it's for to perform management, or even to look at what an employee is accomplishing and rewarding them for it. I don't think a lot of people see that. So I guess that's the part that we need to establish in our documentation as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that employees fail to see, right, is find out what makes you valuable. Find out what your supervisor, your boss, or your employer needs to be successful, and help them achieve it. Right. So you want to make yourself valuable. You want to get a raise. You want to do better. Help them achieve what they're trying to achieve. Right. Help them get to their goals. You're going to get to your goals. So it's very that collaborative mindset helps, and when there's clarity around what's expected, you can't have somebody constantly moving the goalpost either, right? So I think if it's done properly, within the rules of the law, it can be very, very productive. But if it's not, it can be counterproductive. So love talking to you about this today. I know we have a bunch of other HR, IT, cross-pollination things that are happening, so we'll be back to record more videos. I really appreciate your time today, Sravani. I hope this was fruitful for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always great to hear about the IT side of the world. So, and how it interlinks. It's almost like one is with another. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.